Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing. White walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the soft hum of machines, the steady beeping that marks life itself. But when the night falls and the corridors empty, hospitals become something else entirely. Something that feeds on fear, on the loneliness of those who wander through its sterile halls. These are stories that prove that the worst horrors don't always lurk in dark forests or abandoned houses. They can be right here, in the places we trust with our lives. Our first story begins in an old hospital on the outskirts of Chicago. The building had been operational for over 50 years, and though the main floors were modernized, the upper levels still carried the weight of decades. Many nurses and janitors claimed that the old wing was cursed. Equipment would malfunction without reason. Whispers would echo through empty hallways, and sometimes, patients who had no one to visit them would disappear without explanation. It was a cold November night when Nurse Clara started her shift. She had been warned about the old wing, but dismissing it as superstition, she checked in at the nurses' station and began her rounds. Her first stop was room 317, a small, rarely used room in the old wing. The patient there was elderly and had been admitted for observation after a minor fall. The room was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes every small sound feel amplified. Clara checked the monitors. All readings were normal. She adjusted the patient's blanket and prepared to leave when she noticed something strange. The bedside lamp, which she had just switched off, was flickering on and off in rapid succession. She frowned and reached to unplug it, but before she could touch it, the lamp exploded in a flash of light, sending shards of glass across the floor. Clara jumped back, heart racing, feeling as though the air itself had shifted. That was when she heard it, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails on metal, coming from the corner of the room. She turned, flashlight in hand, and saw nothing. The shadows of the furniture seemed normal, but the scratching continued. Slowly, it became more distinct, like someone or something was circling her. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to leave, but as she stepped toward the door, the patient stirred. Not a normal stir. The old man's head lifted impossibly high, eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at her. He whispered something, a word so low she barely caught it. Help. But his mouth moved unnaturally, stretching wider than it should have, teeth sharp and pale in the dim light. Clara stumbled backward. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment she thought she saw more than one figure in the room, shadows moving where shadows should not be, shapes that bent, twisted, and pressed close to the corners of the room. She froze. The patient's eyes followed her, but the gaze was not human. It was knowing, aware, malicious. And then the monitors went dead. The steady beeping ceased. The silence that followed was complete, suffocating. Clara's flashlight shook in her hand, casting wild, erratic beams across the room. The figures in the shadows seemed to react, slithering closer to her, their presence felt rather than seen. She ran, down the hall, past the empty nurse stations, past the elevators that refused to open, until she finally reached the lobby. The security cameras were all offline, the front doors locked as if the hospital itself had refused to let her escape. That night, Clara swore she saw faces pressed against the windows of the old wing, hollow eyes, wide mouths, reaching hands. She quit her job the next day, but the memory stayed. And the whispers. The whispers followed her home, faint, insistent, reminding her that the old wing was still waiting. The second story takes place in a smaller hospital in rural Pennsylvania. Dr. Michael Harper, a young physician, had just completed his residency and was excited to start his first night shift. He prided himself on staying rational, dismissing ghost stories as mere superstition. But he would quickly learn that some things are beyond rational thought. His first patient was a young woman admitted after a car accident. She was stable, but her injuries required observation. Dr. Harper entered the room to check her vitals and noticed that despite the machines showing normal readings, the girl's eyes darted constantly, as though watching something invisible. He smiled to himself, thinking she must be in shock, and continued his routine. But then he heard it, a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible. "Get out." He looked around. No one was there, only the steady beeping of the monitor. He tried to ignore it, chalking it up to fatigue. But the whisper came again, closer this time, insistent. "Leave now." Dr. Harper felt a chill run down his spine. He turned toward the door and froze. Written across the walls in a substance he couldn't identify, letters had formed. "You are next." The patient's eyes were fixed on the writing, unblinking, expressionless. And then she spoke, her voice low and not entirely her own. "He's behind you." Dr. Harper spun around. The hallway was empty. Yet the shadow at the far end stretched and writhed unnaturally. His heart pounded. Machines began to beep erratically. Lights flickered violently. And the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus that filled the entire floor. He ran. Through the halls, past empty rooms, past the elevators that opened only to darkness. And when he thought he was safe, he glimpsed it in the cafeteria. A figure with no face, no features, only a dark, void-like presence. It moved slowly, gliding across the floor, leaving shadows that didn't match its form. Dr. Harper barely escaped that night, but the hospital never let him forget. On every subsequent visit, whether professional or personal, he felt that presence, lurking in empty hallways, always watching, always patient. The second story continued to unfold in the dim, sterile corridors of the rural hospital. The night was heavy, the kind of darkness that seemed to seep into every corner, every room, every crevice. Dr. Harper thought he had left the terror behind, but the hospital had a way of refusing to release those it claimed. He returned weeks later, forced back by duty, only to find the building subtly changed. The corridors were longer, the walls darker, and the smell of antiseptic carried something else, something metallic and ancient, like blood left to rot over decades. Each step he took echoed too loudly, bouncing off the walls like a distorted warning. In the maternity ward, the lights flickered, and whispers curled through the air, indecipherable but full of menace. Dr. Harper paused, trying to locate the source. His eyes caught movement, shadows darting just at the edge of vision. He blinked, and they vanished. But the unease didn't leave. He felt eyes on him, dozens of unseen observers, their gaze cold and calculating. He entered room 209, where a patient was recovering from surgery. Nothing appeared wrong at first, but as he adjusted the IV, he noticed a reflection in the window. A figure stood behind him, tall, twisted, featureless, its limbs moving unnaturally. He spun around. Nothing. Just the bed, the patient, the usual sterile equipment. But when he turned back to the window, the figure had moved closer, pressed against the glass from the inside. A sudden drop in temperature hit him like a physical force. Frost formed on the edges of the monitors, breathing fogged in front of his face. The patient's vitals spiked inexplicably, then flatlined. Dr. Harper rushed to the bed, his hands shaking. He tried to revive the patient, but no matter what he did, the readings refused to stabilize. The shadows seemed to swirl, moving against the natural flow of light, forming shapes that resembled hands reaching for him, faces screaming in silence. A guttural whisper emerged, layered and multi-tonal. "You can't save them. You can't save yourself." The hallway outside erupted with the sounds of doors slamming, equipment falling, and a high-pitched wail that vibrated in Dr. Harper's chest. He ran, heart pounding, navigating the endless corridors that twisted in impossible ways, as if the building itself had become a living labyrinth designed to trap him. At the end of one hallway, he found an elevator. Relief surged, until the doors opened, revealing a scene that made him stop cold. Hundreds of hospital gowns floated in the air, suspended without bodies, moving toward him with the unnatural rhythm of a predator. And above them, a figure loomed, taller than any human, its face a void, its arms stretched impossibly long. He stumbled backward. A small room door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. Darkness enveloped the space, thick and suffocating. The whispers intensified, now forming distinct phrases in his mind. "Leave now. You belong here. You can never leave." Desperation fueled his movements. He found a window and threw it open, climbing out onto the fire escape. But the hospital seemed alive, rearranging itself. Hallways appeared where none existed, doors leading to rooms that shouldn't have been there. The shadows pressed closer, crawling along the walls, as if the building itself sought to consume him. Eventually, Dr. Harper reached the parking lot. The night was eerily still. The hospital stood silently behind him, appearing ordinary, mundane, as if none of the horrors inside had ever existed. But he knew better. The sense of being watched, of being followed, clung to him. That night, he realized the truth. The hospital did not just hold the dead or the sick. It held something older, something patient, something that thrived on fear and isolation. Even when he left town, the nightmares followed. He would wake in cold sweats, hearing faint whispers echoing through his bedroom, the sound of doors slamming in distant hallways. Shadows moved at the corners of his vision, always gone when he looked directly. He tried to dismiss it as trauma, as stress from long shifts. But he knew. The hospital never let anyone truly leave. Its horrors traveled, hidden in memory, in sleep, in every quiet corner of the mind. The third story begins in an abandoned wing of a metropolitan hospital, a place officially closed after a series of unexplained deaths. Rumors of ghost sightings and strange occurrences had circulated for years, but a small group of investigators decided to enter, determined to document the paranormal. The team arrived just after midnight, equipped with cameras, flashlights, and devices designed to detect energy fluctuations. As they stepped inside, the air grew heavy with the smell of decay. Peeling paint, rusted metal, and the faint stench of old antiseptic permeated the corridors. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing off walls covered in faded bloodstains and water damage. Suddenly, one of the investigators, Emma, stopped. Her flashlight caught something moving in the corner of her eye. A shadow darted across the hallway, faster than any human could move. She pointed her camera, but the figure was gone before it could be captured. The team pressed forward, entering the surgical wing. Old operating tables lay scattered, instruments rusted, trays overturned. On one table, a single scalpel rested, pristine and gleaming despite decades of abandonment. The temperature dropped sharply, and the devices began to beep erratically. Then came the whispers, soft, insidious, coming from every direction at once. The words were incomprehensible, but the intent was clear: warning, threat, malice. Emma froze, feeling hands brush against her arms, cold and insistent. The team tried to regroup, but the corridors twisted, leading them in circles, as if the hospital itself was alive, reshaping to trap them. One by one, the shadows appeared, humanoid yet wrong. Limbs bent unnaturally, faces twisted, eyes empty voids. They moved without sound, pressing closer, encircling the investigators. Panic overtook rational thought. Cameras were dropped, flashlights flickered and died, leaving them in total darkness. Emma heard a voice, familiar yet impossible. It was her own, screaming inside her head. "You cannot leave. You belong here." And then the first one vanished. A scream tore through the darkness, echoing from a place where no one stood. The remaining team ran blindly, guided only by instinct. Doors led to dead ends, hallways stretched endlessly, and the shadows followed, patient, relentless, inevitable. By dawn, the building was quiet again. No sign of the investigators remained. Only the faint echoes of their fear, lingering in the air, absorbed into the walls, waiting for the next unwary soul to wander inside. After the shadows had chased the investigators through the abandoned wing, Emma found herself separated from the group. Her flashlight flickered wildly, throwing jagged beams across the walls covered with peeling paint and old, dried blood. The air was thick, almost tangible, like walking through a heavy, invisible curtain. Every breath burned in her lungs, every heartbeat pounded like a warning drum. She stumbled down a corridor that seemed unfamiliar, though she had walked these halls countless times in the plans she had studied. Doors appeared where there had been none, and corridors twisted impossibly, as if the hospital had rearranged itself while she wasn't looking. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, overlapping in a chaotic symphony that seemed to come from inside her own mind. Suddenly, she saw movement in one of the old patient rooms. A gurney, tipped on its side, started sliding toward her on its own, the metal wheels squealing as if screaming in pain. Behind it, shadows flickered, forming shapes that resembled nurses, doctors, patients, but all wrong. Faces were elongated, eyes hollow, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. They moved closer with a slow, predatory grace, and Emma knew she couldn't outrun them. She tried the door at the end of the hall, locked. She banged on it, screaming, but only silence answered. Her flashlight caught something on the floor, a trail of footprints, but they were not human. Large, irregular, almost clawed, disappearing into the walls themselves. Following them became instinctive, though terror clawed at her from the inside. In the next room, she found evidence of past horrors, hospital beds stacked unnaturally, instruments rusted, trays overturned, and in the center, a single figure, tall, faceless, limbs bending in ways that made no sense. It raised a hand slowly, deliberately pointing at her. A cold, suffocating pressure pressed against her chest, and the whispers coalesced into a single horrifying phrase. "You belong to us." Emma stumbled backward, her flashlight dropping and spinning across the floor. Shadows lunged at her from every direction, the darkness itself seeming to grasp, to pull, to devour. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Her mind raced. Rational thought had no place here. Fear had become all-consuming. Then something shifted. A sudden light appeared, dim but steady, coming from an old nurse station at the far end. Desperate, Emma crawled toward it. Her hands scraped against the rough tiles, cutting her skin, leaving small red streaks that almost seemed to glow in the darkness. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing and writhing, but they did not vanish. They waited, patient, hungry, aware. She reached the station and found a phone. Picking it up, she tried to call for help, but all she heard was static, and within it, faint whispers repeating her name over and over. She slammed the phone down, realizing that the hospital was no longer bound by normal rules. Its walls, its halls, even its air had become a trap. Something ancient, something inhuman, had claimed this place, and it would not let her leave. Panic surged. Emma scrambled for an exit, finally spotting a window at the end of the hall. She threw it open and climbed out onto the fire escape, cold metal biting her hands. As she descended, the whispers followed, echoing in her mind, unrelenting. She reached the ground and ran into the night, but every shadow along the way seemed to reach, to flicker, to pulse with life. Even when she finally escaped to the street, the hospital remained behind her, ordinary and silent, as if nothing had happened. But Emma knew better. The horrors of that night had imprinted themselves on the building and on her. Whatever lurked inside, whatever had claimed those corridors, would remain, patient, waiting, always hungry. As she reached her car and drove away, she glimpsed something in the rearview mirror. A figure, tall and faceless, standing at the top of the fire escape, watching. The shadows behind it shifted unnaturally, forming shapes of the people she had seen inside, floating and writhing, their empty eyes fixed on her. The whispers returned, faint now, but unmistakable. "We are always here. You cannot escape." The night was silent outside, but inside the abandoned wing of the Metropolitan Hospital, the darkness was alive. Emma's escape had not ended the horror. It had only delayed it. She thought she had left the terror behind, but hospitals do not forget. They do not forgive. And those who enter their shadows often carry pieces of them forever. Weeks later, a new security team was assigned to patrol the old wing, curious about reports of strange activity. Cameras were installed, motion sensors activated, and yet, the first night revealed just how powerful the presence inside was. Security footage showed fleeting shadows moving against the flow of corridors, figures bending unnaturally, doors opening and closing on their own. Yet the most disturbing sight was the empty stretch of hallway where Emma had once run. Footprints appeared there, leading nowhere, vanishing into the wall as if the building itself had swallowed them. Meanwhile, Emma tried to live normally. She changed cities, jobs, and routines, but every night she dreamed of the hospital. Endless corridors, the hissing whispers, the faceless figure. Each dream was more vivid, more suffocating, more real. The fear had followed her, creeping into her waking life, turning shadows in her apartment into potential threats, making every dark corner a stage for the horrors she had seen. One night she received a call. No voice, just static, faint whispers calling her name. She tried to hang up, but the phone seemed to be stuck in her hand. The whispers grew louder, repeating, "We are waiting. You cannot leave. You belong to us." Panic overtook her. She dropped the phone, which continued to whisper even after hitting the floor. Driven by a mix of terror and compulsion, she returned to the hospital. The building was still there, ordinary and silent in the moonlight. The front doors were locked, but somehow she entered, as if the hospital itself allowed her passage. The air was heavy, cold, suffocating. The faint smell of antiseptic and decay clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. Inside, the corridors twisted, longer than they had any right to be. Shadows pressed close, moving independently of light. Figures emerged at the edges of her vision. Doctors, nurses, patients. But wrong. Faces were hollow, limbs bent unnaturally, bodies stretched and malformed. They whispered in unison, "You cannot leave. You belong to us." Emma tried to move, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in sync with her own terrified heartbeat. Then from the far end of the hallway, the faceless figure appeared. Tall, impossibly long limbs, a void where its face should be. It moved slowly, deliberately, each step echoing through the hall like a drumbeat of doom. She tried to run, but the figure glided, effortlessly, shadows bending around it as it closed the distance. Behind her, every room she passed contained horrors frozen in time. Patients trapped mid-scream, shadows writhing across walls, instruments floating in the air, rusted trays spinning as if controlled by unseen hands. Reaching an old stairwell, Emma descended frantically, each step heavier than the last. The whispers followed, now layered, chaotic, screaming her name, mocking her, filling her mind with visions of death, despair, and endless corridors. Finally, she reached the basement. The room was enormous, filled with hospital beds, medical equipment, and a thick, unnatural fog. Figures moved silently between the beds, shadows that seemed almost sentient. And there in the center, the faceless figure awaited, surrounded by dozens of twisted forms, all staring at her with empty voids where eyes should be. Emma's scream echoed through the space, swallowed immediately by the suffocating darkness. She realized with absolute clarity that this was the heart of the hospital's evil. It had fed on fear for decades, claiming patients, staff, and intruders alike. And now, it had claimed her attention. The figures advanced, slow, deliberate, surrounding her completely. Emma tried to run, but the shadows pressed in, bending reality, folding the corridors in on themselves. She fell, the floor dissolving beneath her, plunging her into a black void where whispers became screams, shadows became tangible, and the sensation of being consumed was absolute. And then, as if through a thin veil, she glimpsed a window of light, her last chance. Summoning every ounce of courage, she lunged toward it, claws of darkness scraping her arms, her hair, her clothes. She broke through, tumbling into the night outside, gasping for breath, skin raw from the hospital's grasp. Behind her, the building remained silent, normal, cold in the moonlight. Yet Emma knew it was lying. The horrors inside had not left her. They never do. She could feel them in the shadows, in the spaces between reality, in every corner of her mind, every dark hallway, every abandoned wing, every forgotten patient's room. They waited, patient, hungry, eternal. Even as she drove away, heart pounding, she glimpsed shadows flickering across the windows of her apartment. At night, she still hears the whispers, faint but persistent. And sometimes when she passes a hospital, she swears she sees a faceless figure watching from a high window, waiting, calling, reminding her that some horrors never end. Because hospitals are not just places of healing. They are vessels of memory, vessels of fear. And some fear never leaves.